Welcome to Top Notch Online TV, a paragon of excellence. With you today is teacher Risper, a teacher from PCA Kikuyu High School, a teacher of English and Literature. I'm an examiner as well as an author. We continue to demystify Kazuo Ishiguro's An Artist of the Floating World. We are tackling themes that we had already started in an earlier episode. If you missed out on any, please make an effort to catch up. All episodes are available on Top Notch Online TV that can be found on YouTube. We have already discussed several of the themes. Among them, we talked about regret as a theme. We talked about conflict, teacher-student relationship, as well as art. We are further looking at other themes, and for today, we are going to begin with our first theme that we are going to call war and its effects. They usually talk about whenever there's an eventuality of war, war has no winner because what comes out of a war are negative impact. The impact that comes out of war brings about negative outcomes. Now, when you're looking at war, we in the book of An Artist of the Floating World, we are making reference to a very particular war. We are talking about World War II and the eventuality, the outcome after World War II. We know that World War II came to an end after the dropping of atomic bomb by the Americans on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. This made the Japanese to surrender. Now this is the era we are looking at. After the surrender of the Japanese, after the loss of the World War II, that particular war we are looking at. Now, according to An Artist of the Floating World, what are some of the effects we are going to see that emanate from war? The first effect of war, we are looking at the loss of lives. Whenever there's an eventuality of war, a lot of people end up losing their lives. A case in, quote, we have Misuji Ono's son, a son by the name of Kenji, who died, and it even took a year for his ashes to be sent back for burial. We are seeing that people are losing their lives. The younger generation went into war fighting on behalf of Japan, and they lost. Also, during that war, we are learning that someone like Misuji Ono had lost his wife Michiko. And when they're talking about Michiko, from what we can gather, a conversation between Matsuda and Michiko, we are learning that the circumstances under which Michiko died, they're describing it as some kind of ambush. Further details about that have not been given, but we are learning that she died in some kind of an ambush. We are going to the second effect. What else is the effect of war? We are looking at the negative effect of war. The second one, you're talking about destruction of property. Whenever there's an eventuality of war, property tends to get destroyed. Let's give examples from the book. Which property got destroyed during the war? One among them, let's give the example of Ono's house. Ono's house that he had inherited from Akira Sugumira. It had been a prestigious house, but then we are seeing that the house lies in shambles. Even a certain wing of that house is no longer in use. It has been closed up and repairs are ongoing. Even we are learning that some part of the house has just been repaired. And during that era of the occupation by the Americans, even sending for material, it would take a lot of time before the material can come to you. Nails and the timber, they used to take a lot of time in coming back, but they're at a period where they are rebuilding. Another example of the destruction of property, let's talk about the Migihidari. The Migihidari had been a popular establishment. A lot of influential people used to hang around there. But now, after the war, as Shintaro and Ono are hanging around Mrs. Kawakami's place, we are looking at the Migihidari. Migihidari was no longer had windows. They had all been destroyed. We are seeing that war results to destruction of property. Another effect of war comes in the psychological form. The people who have experienced the war, they are no longer the same. And you can have cases in quotes. First of all, you can talk about Suichi. Suichi, the husband to Setsuko, he is a very bitter person. Whenever he attends these burials, the burial of his comrades, people of his age, he can't contain his bitterness, he can't contain his pain. As much as the war is over, he's harboring some hard feelings towards the people who encourage them to go to war. The older generation, they're the ones who told us to fight for this cause. Yet it is an unworthy cause that resulted to the death of some people. Some people such as Kenji. He looks at Kenji, he feels it might as well have been him who lost his own life. Still on the psychological effects, the aftermath of the war. How do people feel after the war? We are looking at another one such as the Hirayama boy. When he sings these songs that had earned him approval of the people, they would pat him on the back, they would even give him some money. Right now, whenever they hear these songs, people end up subjecting the Hirayama boy to a beating. This shows that the people have not yet healed. That they have not yet healed on the fact that Japan lost the war. Also on the psychological effects, the third illustration on the same. We look at Ono, and Ono confides in Matsuda that the smell of burning reminds him of bombings and fire. This is someone who is still sitting from the aftermath of the war. War has its effects, and sometimes they're not even immediate. They might be felt way into the present, into the future. We still have another theme that we shall call memory. There's the theme of memory. The book is majorly based on the memory of Masuji Ono. And at this point, Masuji Ono is telling us the story from a first-person narration, concentrating on his recollection of the past. He tends to be biased sometimes, but you don't have a recollection of someone else so that you know at what point is he really lying. We can only be reduced to being judgmental. And when we're looking at this theme of memory, if you're looking at it maybe as a style, we shall be talking about flashback. But now when you're looking at it, what issues are being discussed? The issue of memory, therefore it becomes a theme. And we are supposed to realize Masuji Ono can be described as an unreliable narrator. He is telling us his story, but in trying to portray himself in the positive light, or even trying to avoid divulging some information he is uncomfortable with, he resorts to some kind of tactic that makes us to judge him as an unreliable narrator. What are some of these tactics that he resorts to when he doesn't want to give us the full information? Among the tactics he resorts to, we are going to talk about digression. Digression is whereby you are telling me a story and then you start going to something totally different. He is talking about he had an argument with Setsuko. Then, before telling us about that argument he had with Setsuko, he goes ahead and digresses, telling us about the first time he met Dr. Saito. That is, Ono resorting to digression. He changes the line of thought, and he now goes back to tell us unrelated stories. Another one, maybe it can be attributed to his old age. Ono does a lot of memory failure. He keeps mixing up his stories. I'll give a case in quotes. He's talking about Miyake. Miyake, when they ran into each other, Miyake was telling him about the president of his mother company. And then when Miyake was telling him about the president of the mother company taking his own life, he goes ahead and he says, I think he described it as the greatest cowardice of all. Then suddenly, Ono no longer attributes those words to Jiro Miyake. He says, Jiro Miyake couldn't have been the one who used these words. These words sound particular to Suichi. Suichi, his son-in-law. We are looking at Misuji Ono as an unreliable narrator. We've previously said when he doesn't want to divulge the full extent of his involvement, he resorts to things such as digression, memory failure. Another one that makes him an unreliable narrator, he hides under concealment. The daughters are convinced that the father knows the reason as to why the Miyakes pulled out. But on his part, Misuji Ono is adamant on the fact that these people pulled out because they were honest people. They could not hold a candle to Ono's family, therefore they opted pulling out from the marriage negotiation. But the true intention has to do with his past involvement and his reluctance to take responsibility for his past actions. But then he's concealing and he is giving another reason as to the turn of events. We're still talking about the theme of memory. The memory of Misuji Ono. The first part, we've looked at it as first-person narration, and he turns out not to be reliable. Still on the theme of memory, let's look at what are some of the things we learn from Ono's memory. Number one, we learn about his earlier interest into becoming an artist, what happened between his father. I'll not dwell so much on that. We've already said, how was he influenced into becoming an artist? Another thing we are learning from his memory, we are learning about his first acquaintance with Dr. Saito. How did he and Dr. Saito get to know each other? But we are learning it from his own perspective, from what he can remember, as opposed to what Setsuko is claiming. Another thing we are learning about Ono's memory, how he had met Matsuda. When Matsuda had approached him, trying to poach him from Mori-san's villa. Still from his memory, we are learning about his encounter with Jiro Miyake. We are still learning about his encounter with Kuroda, the one that made him learn that Kuroda was no longer in prison. That is it about the theme of memory, but you cannot really rely on Ono's account of events into making a conclusion. He tends to be biased on his part. We are going to yet another theme, a theme that we are going to call search for redemption. When someone wants to be redeemed, you can only want to be redeemed for something you consider an earlier sin, an earlier to be saved from. When you're looking at to redeem oneself is to be saved from sin. Something that you had done earlier, and we had already talked about the theme of regret. Now these people, after they have regretted, do they seek for redemption? Do they seek to make amends? Yes, they do. And when you're looking at the search for redemption, we are going to look at a number of characters. Let's start with Misuji Ono. Misuji Ono, he somehow regrets his past. And because he regrets his past, one among the ways he seeks redemption is by trying to forget the past. He is not willing to come clean about his involvement. At the same time, he tries to forget about his involvement. A case in quote, he stashes away his paintings, his paintings that are reminiscent of his past activities. If he were proud of his activities, would be keeping his paintings in full display of any onlooker, but he puts it away. Another way is in trying to seek redemption for his earlier sins. He tries to make amends with Kuroda. He goes ahead, even finds out Kuroda's address from his workplace, and he is able to trace Kuroda's place, or he's able to trace Kuroda's house, where he intends to make amends by speaking to Kuroda. And being denied the chance to speak to Kuroda after Enchi realizes his true identity, he still does not give up. He goes ahead and pens down a letter to the fact that he wants to have a meetup with Kuroda, something that Kuroda turns down. Still on Ono's Honor's search for redemption, when he is seeking redemption, he finally realizes that his past might come to haunt him. Therefore, at the dinner table with the Saitos, he decides to speak about his involvement, and he even admits to the fact finally that his past activities he is not proud of. And upon his admission, it is like a weight is lifted off his shoulders. His daughter's Miyai sails through successfully, and the daughter ends up getting married. And also Ono takes back to painting. You see that? It is like a message from the author that the truth sets you free. Finally, when he comes clean with the truth, he is able to have a weight lifted off his shoulders. Away from Ono, there's still another character who is in search of redemption. Something he feels, something he regrets about his past. Let's look at Shintaro. Shintaro had been in awe of his teacher Ono. Later on, his past comes to haunt him. His past in particular, we are talking about his involvement in the painting of the China crisis. They were mocking China when, through paintings, the way China was attacked by Japan and it fell at the hands of Japan. Later on, that these activities became unpopular. These activities, they were now infamous. They were notorious for having done such paintings. He is now in search of redemption. And it comes a point where he needs to find a job at a certain high school. He needs to disown his activities in these paintings of the China crisis. Therefore, he turns it around and puts blame on his teacher. He says that he was working under the instruction of his teacher Ono, and he even goes ahead to meet Ono, asking Ono to remember that he had been against this work, but then he was only merely being obedient to the teacher. And he sees this as an avenue that would redeem him and enable him to get the new job that he is seeking. This attempt at getting redeemed marks the falling out with his teacher Ono, and they become estranged after that. The last illustration on the search for redemption, the theme of search for redemption, we have a last illustration in a character by the name of Naguchi. Naguchi is already familiar if you've been following the discussions. Naguchi had composed songs that were military, and these songs were responsible for whipping up the emotions of people, sending people into war. Now, because of these songs, Naguchi feels partly responsible, and he decides to commit harakiri, the honorable suicide, as a form of apology. And Miyake's boss also takes a similar path of harakiri as a form of apology, seeking when he is searching for his redemption. He needs to say sorry for something he feels was a mistake of his past. He also goes the harakiri way on behalf of his company. His company had done some work that he feels ashamed of in the past. We are finally going to our last theme, a theme that we are going to call the theme of marriage. In fact, this whole recollection of Misuji Ono and his past is because there was a hurdle in his daughter's path of getting married. We are first of all learning about Nariko. Nariko was set for marriage. She was at the marriage age. She was about 26 years of age. The previous year, we are learning that her marriage negotiation had fallen through because of her father's past. Whenever there used to be a marriage negotiation, the two families would send out investigators. The family of the bride would send out an investigator to find out any skeletons that might be in the groom's family's closet, and vice versa. The family of the the family of the groom would also send out their own investigator. And when a family was clear of any wrongdoings, the marriage negotiations would go on. Now we see that was the case that was happening with Noriko. Now that Noriko's marriage negotiations with the Miyakes had fallen through, Noriko turns out to be a bitter person, and she is projecting the bitterness to the father. She feels that the father's past is the one that stood in her way of finally getting hitched to Miyake Ajiro, a man she had been in love with, and she only thought that the negotiations the Miyai was some kind of a formality. As you're talking about the theme of marriage, let's also get to define a terminology that you're calling Miyai, M-I-A-I in spelling. It is a Japanese word, but then it has been incorporated into our English dictionary. It has to do with a marriage interview. The two families get to meet and they interview each other on any details they might be needing clarity on. When you're meeting the Saitos and the family of the Saitos and the Onos are having a Miyai where they meet in a certain hotel, and they are talking about they love the food from that particular hotel. And you're seeing before that particular Miyai, Setsuko was very nervous. She is even over preparing herself, and the father is now blaming her for taking a lot of time in preparation. You might have thought it was the actual wedding. We are also looking at Miyake was also bound to get married to a new person now that his and Noriko's negotiations did not go through. Another aspect you cannot fail to mention when you're talking about the theme of marriage, we are talking about a go-between. There was always a go-between, a connector that was connecting this bride's family to the groom's family. We shall give an example of someone called Mr. Kyo. Mr. Kyo, who was the go-between in the case of the Saitos and the Ono's family in the event of Noriko's marriage negotiations. We're also looking at another mention of a marriage. There's a marriage between Michiko and Ono, which had only ended after Michiko lost her life during the war. And we are learning that Matsuda had played a great role into bringing Michiko and Ono together. And finally, we are looking at a marriage between Suichi and Setsuko. Setsuko was the daughter to Ono, the elder daughter of Ono. She was married to Suichi. And we see that Suichi has some kind of authoritative hold over Setsuko. Setsuko, even when she's speaking out her ideas, the father always wonders, is she speaking out her ideas or Suichi's? Therefore, we can conclude that Suichi has a hold on Setsuko. She can even verbalize his ideas that she is learning from the husband. Therefore, she has accepted Suichi as the head of her family. There's still another theme that we can do it by way of mentioning. There's the theme of change. The theme of change you're going to look at, one example is the landscape. What used to be the olden days Farakawa, the place that the story has been set at Farakawa in Japan. The landscape is changing. The Migihidari is no longer standing. Mrs. Kawakami's establishment is no longer there. And we see that the Migihidari, where it had occupied, a modern building comes up and there's a bench outside that Ono loves to sit on. Apart from the landscape changing, we are also going to talk about change in the attitudes. People, and we are going to use an example such as Suichi. Suichi, by example, had been among the young people who had been aroused into going into war. But later on, meaning they were really in awe of Japan's militarism, in awe of Japan's attitude of nationalism. Right now, we are seeing someone like Suichi regretting there's a change in his attitude. He regrets their involvement in the World War II, and he's even now encouraging his own son to even admire the Western side. He is encouraging his son to admire things that have to do with America. That brings an end to the understanding of theme. There are still other themes that you can find across, but they're not really dwelt on. They're not majorly dwelt on. And I believe now you are ready to tackle any question in case it comes in paper 3, because this book is among the optional. Therefore, it will be tested in paper 3. I hope you have gained an understanding into the book. Until next time, it is a goodbye.